Every Friday at exactly 6:15 p.m., the same man sat at the same table by the window. He always ordered 2 meals, but only ever touched one. The staff stopped asking questions months ago. The regulars had stopped looking. To the occasional newcomer, who noticed and leaned toward their dining companion with a raised eyebrow, the waitress, Marla, would simply shake her head and mouth 2 words. "Leave him." To most people who passed through Harlow's diner on a Friday evening, he was just a man who couldn't move on, a shadow in a flannel shirt. A ritual nobody understood until one evening in early November. A woman in a charcoal wool suit walked in out of the cold. She didn't whisper to anyone. She didn't assume. She walked straight to his table, glanced at the empty chair across from him, the untouched plate of pot roast still steaming, and asked quietly enough that only he could hear, "Who are you still waiting for?" For the first time in 14 months, Jack Brennan looked up and answered. Harlow's diner sat on the corner of Caldwell Street and 5th. Wedged between a dry cleaner that had been closing down for 3 years and a hardware store that smelled of sawdust and rust, it was the kind of place that had a hand-painted menu board above the counter, mismatched salt shakers, and a pie display case that was always one slice ahead of the posted inventory. On weekday mornings, it filled with tradespeople. On Sunday afternoons, it drew families with toddlers and grandparents. The kind of crowd that made the booths feel warm, even when the heat was struggling. But on Friday evenings, it held a quieter congregation, people who had survived the week and wanted something uncomplicated, a plate of something hot, a cup of coffee that didn't require a name spelled on a cup. Jack Brennan had been coming every Friday for 14 months. He always arrived at 6:12 and was seated by 6:15. He sat at table 7, the two-top by the east window, the one with the slightly uneven leg that the kitchen staff had shimmed up with a folded cardboard square 3 winters ago and never properly fixed. He sat in the chair facing the room. The other chair faced the window. He ordered the same 2 things every week. For himself, the beef stew with a side of sourdough bread and a black coffee. For the other chair, the roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables and a glass of iced water with lemon. He never touched the second meal. He never moved the glass. When the bill came, he paid for both. He tipped generously, always in cash, always exactly 22%. Marla, who had been waitressing at Harlow's for 11 years, had stopped trying to talk him out of ordering the second plate after the 3rd week. By the 5th week, she simply brought it out with the same care as the first. Everything arranged properly, the napkin folded, the utensils aligned. She didn't know why, but she understood in the way that people who work in diners for 11 years come to understand certain things about strangers, that the why was not hers to hold. Other customers were less patient with mystery. A man named Hank, who sat at the counter every Friday and ate a French dip with the paper open to the sports section, had once muttered loudly enough, "Some people just can't let go." His wife, who was more perceptive and kinder, had pressed her hand over his and said nothing. A young couple in the back booth had photographed Jack once, the untouched plate centered in their frame, and whispered about it all through their meal. They left without looking at him again. A woman with a child in a high chair had approached him once gently and asked if he was all right. He had smiled, a real smile, not the dismissive kind, and said, "Yes, thank you." She had nodded and returned to her booth, and later Marla had seen her wipe at one eye with the corner of her sleeve. Jack Brennan was 41 years old. He had sandy brown hair that had started going silver at the temples in the last year. He was broad-shouldered and wore the kind of hands that came from actual labor. He ran a residential renovation company, Brennan and Sons, which he had built with his father before his father retired to Tucson, and which he now ran with 2 full-time crews and a part-time office manager named Brenda, who sent him emails and bullet points and never required more than one reply. He had a daughter named Lucy, who was 6 years old and attended 1st grade at Morningside Elementary. She liked horses, complicated puzzles, and a particular brand of orange crackers that had to be purchased from a specific grocery store 3 miles from their house. He had been a husband for 7 years. He had been a widower for 14 months. His wife's name had been Nora. Clara Vance did not usually eat at diners. This was not snobbery so much as logistics. Her life had a particular architecture. Meetings that bled into calls that bled into working dinners at places where she could order something reliable and keep her laptop open without drawing attention. She was the CEO of Harrove Industrial Solutions, a mid-sized manufacturing and logistics company that her father had built and that she had spent the last 9 years transforming into something considerably larger. The company had 460 employees across 3 states. She had a personal assistant, a communications director, and a standing reservation at a steak restaurant 2 blocks from her office for the nights she needed to eat without thinking. She had ended up at Harlow's Diner on a Friday evening in early November because her car had a flat tire on Caldwell Street. And while she waited for the roadside service, she had been standing on the sidewalk in a wool suit in 40-degree weather, and the diner's window had been lit up warm and yellow, and she had thought, 20 minutes. Something hot. She had not planned to stay. She had ordered coffee at the counter, then moved to a small table near the front, but the hostess, a teenager named Megan, had steered her toward the back, saying the counter was reserved for regulars on Friday evenings. Clara had not objected. She had her phone and a folder of quarterly projections and 40 minutes to kill. It was only after she had been seated and had opened her folder that she noticed him. Table 7. The man with the untouched plate. At first, she assumed the other person was in the restroom. She looked up 3 minutes later. Still no one. The plate had not been touched. The glass of iced water had not moved. The man across from the empty chair was eating slowly, looking out the window, not looking at his phone, not looking at the room. He looked as though he was inside a conversation, the kind of conversation that only one person could hear. Clara watched him for a moment. Then she went back to her projections. But there was something about the stillness of it. Most people who ate alone at restaurants occupied themselves. They read, they worked, they scrolled, they looked around. This man was simply present. Completely. Quietly present in a way she couldn't recall seeing in anyone for a very long time. When Marla came to refill her coffee, Clara asked casually, "Does he come in every week?" Marla looked at the man at table 7 with a softened expression. "Every Friday. 14 months. Always alone." She set down the coffee pot. "That's a complicated question." Clara watched as the man placed his hand flat on the edge of the table. Not reaching for anything, just resting there. As though touching a surface that held a temperature he was trying to remember. Her phone buzzed. The roadside service was 30 minutes out, not 20. She closed the quarterly projections folder. She picked up her coffee cup and walked to table 7. She did not know exactly why. Later, when she tried to reconstruct the decision, she couldn't reduce it to anything satisfying. It was not pity. It was not curiosity, exactly. It was something closer to recognition, the way you sometimes see a posture or an expression in a stranger and understand without words that they are carrying something familiar. She stopped at the edge of his table. He didn't look up immediately. She glanced at the untouched plate, the glass with the lemon slice, the folded napkin that had not been unfolded. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. Then, "Who are you still waiting for?" He looked up. His eyes were gray-blue. They were not startled. They were careful, the eyes of someone who had learned to assess a situation before reacting to it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "Would you like to sit down?" She sat in the chair facing him, not the empty chair, which she had understood instinctively was not available, but she pulled a chair from the adjacent and used table and placed it at the side. He seemed to appreciate the precision of that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Outside, a city bus moved through the orange streetlight. Inside, the diner murmured softly around them, the sound of silverware and low conversation, the hiss of the kitchen. "You asked who I'm waiting for," Jack said finally. His voice was level, not flat, level. "The honest answer is no one. I stopped waiting a while ago." He paused. "But I keep coming." Clara said nothing. She waited. Her name was Nora. He said it the way people say the names of places they grew up in, familiar, slightly worn, weighted with memory rather than grief. "We came here every Friday from our third date onward. This was our restaurant." A small pause. "Not fancy enough to be a special occasion place. Just ours." He looked at the untouched plate. Roasted chicken, seasonal vegetables, a glass of water with a lemon wedge. That was always her order. Clara followed his gaze. The chicken had gone slightly cold, she could tell. The lemon had started to bleed into the water. "I made a promise," Jack continued. "The last Friday she was able to come. She was all ready." He stopped. Started again. "We both knew it was going to be the last one. She made me promise I wouldn't stop coming. That I wouldn't make it a place I avoided." He looked back at the window. "She said, I don't want you to lose the restaurant too." The diner hummed around them. "So I kept coming," he said simply. "And I kept ordering her meal." A pause that held no self-consciousness. "Maybe it's strange." "No," Clara said. It came out more firmly than she'd intended. He looked at her. "I don't think it's strange," she said more carefully. "I think it's the most honest thing I've seen someone do in a very long time." Jack studied her for a moment. He had, she noticed, the particular quality of someone who listened to what people actually said rather than what they assumed they meant. "I'm Clara," she said. "Jack." Outside, the November wind pushed a scatter of leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, Marla refilled his coffee without being asked, left a second cup for Clara, and retreated without comment. "You're not going to ask me if I'm okay," he said. It was not quite a question. "Are you?" A corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, but the beginning of one. "Most days." A pause. "That's a fair answer." They sat for another few minutes. The comfortable thing, Clara realized, was that neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. She had spent her professional life in rooms where silence was treated as a problem to be solved, a gap to be managed. This silence felt different. It felt like two people standing at adjacent windows looking out at the same rain. Her phone buzzed. Roadside service. 15 minutes. She looked at Jack. "I have to go soon. My car's out front." He nodded. She stood, tucked her folder under her arm. She reached into her coat pocket out of habit. She had a card in there, her business card, the heavy cream stock with the embossed letters, and she held it for a moment. Then she put it back. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He looked up at her, that careful gray-blue gaze. "Thank you for asking." She walked back to the counter, paid for her coffee, and went outside to wait in the cold. She did not think about him on the drive home. But on Thursday the following week, she found herself checking her calendar for Friday evening. What Clara didn't know, what nobody at Harlow's knew, because Jack didn't talk about it, was that Lucy had never come to the diner on Friday evenings. Not once in 14 months. Lucy had been 4 years old when Nora died. She was now 6, in first grade with a teacher named Mrs. Farley who sent weekly updates home on powder blue stationery. Lucy remembered her mother in fragments, the smell of her shampoo, the particular way she folded blankets with one smooth pull. She had not forgotten her mother so much as she was still assembling the memory. The way you slowly fill in a puzzle you've inherited half complete. Jack's mother, Dorothy, came to stay on Friday evenings. She drove from her house on Langford Road with a casserole dish and a box of those specific orange crackers Lucy favored, and she stayed until Jack came home at 8. She never asked him to justify the ritual. She had been married to his father for 43 years. She understood that some forms of loyalty looked strange from the outside and felt necessary from the inside. He had not brought Lucy to Harlow's on Fridays because he could not guarantee what version of himself she would see there. At home, he was careful, steady, reliable, the person she needed him to be. He made her breakfast at the same time each day, eggs on weekdays, pancakes on Saturday, the orange crackers and yogurt on Sunday, which Lucy called a lazy breakfast, with complete approval. He read to her every night from the stack of library books they renewed weekly together. He kept the routines tight and the tone warm because children, he had learned, needed the architecture of normalcy, even when the architecture had lost some of its original rooms. He had watched Lucy carefully in those first months after Nora died. He had expected the grief to manifest the way adults imagine children's grief, openly, through questions, through tears at bedtime. Instead, Lucy had grieved in small and precise ways. She had reorganized her bookshelf for no clear reason. She had for 3 weeks insisted on wearing the same blue sweater every day. She had stopped drawing horses for a month and then started again. And when she started again, they were all green, a color Nora had loved, which Lucy might or might not have known consciously, but clearly knew in some deeper, wordless register. He had learned to read her the way he read old houses, through the small signs, the things that were slightly off angle, the places where the temperature was different. He had in turn let her see him grieve in careful, measured doses. He had cried once in front of her in the kitchen on a Sunday morning when a song came on the radio that Nora had liked, and Lucy had walked over and leaned against his leg without saying anything, and he had put his hand on her shoulder, and they had stood there for 2 minutes while the song played out. He considered it one of the best things he had ever done as a father. Letting her see that grief was survivable, that it came in waves and receded, that you could stand in it and keep standing. But at Harlow's on Friday evenings, he allowed himself to be a man who was still holding something he hadn't been able to put down. He was not sure it was healthy. His therapist, a thoughtful man named Dr. Park, had not told him to stop. He had said once, some rituals are a form of maintenance, not avoidance. The question is whether you're keeping it in order to stay present in your grief, or whether it's keeping you from moving forward in your life. Jack had thought about that for a long time. He had not come to a conclusion that he fully trusted. So he kept going. He had started in recent months to notice the difference. The first 6 months, the Friday ritual had felt like drowning slowly in the same spot. The second 6 months, it had started to feel more like. He struggled for the right word, tending. Like visiting a garden that you couldn't let go wild. And then the woman in the charcoal suit had sat down across from him, and he had said the words out loud for the first time to someone who was not Dr. Park or his mother. And something, very quietly, had shifted. The following Friday, Clara came back. She had told herself she was returning because she had liked the pie. Marla had left a slice of apple pie on the counter as she left, and she'd taken it home in a paper box and eaten it at her kitchen island at 10:30 at night, and it had been one of the best things she'd tasted in months. And that was a perfectly rational reason to return to a diner. She arrived at 6:45, later than the previous week. She could see from the window that he was already there. Table 7, the window chair. The second place setting untouched. She did not go to his table immediately. She sat at the counter and ordered coffee and the apple pie and ate slowly, not looking at him. Not looking at him, either. She was, she told herself, simply a person eating pie at a diner on a Friday. After about 15 minutes, she heard the chair scrape at table 7. She didn't look up. A moment later, Jack Brennan appeared at the stool 2 seats down from her. He sat down. Ordered a coffee refill from Marla without looking at the menu. "You came back," he said. "The pie," she said. He glanced at her half-eaten slice. The corner of his mouth moved again in that way she was beginning to recognize, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "It's a good pie," he agreed. They sat in silence for a moment. The counter felt different from the table, more casual, more side by side than face to face. Less like a conversation that needed managing. "You left before I could ask," he said. "What do you do?" "I run a company." "What kind?" "Manufacturing and logistics. We make components for agricultural equipment, mostly, and some distribution work." She said it the way she always said it to people who weren't in her industry, accurately, without the performance that crept into her voice when she was in a boardroom. "It sounds drier than it is." He looked at his coffee. "Probably doesn't." She smiled. "Probably doesn't," she agreed. "You do renovation?" "Residential. Mostly old houses. Things that need to be put back together." She looked at his hands on the counter. The calluses, the slight discoloration at one knuckle from what looked like a healed cut. "Do you like it?" she asked. He thought about it. Really thought about it, the way people so rarely did with that question. "Yeah," he said. "I like taking something that's been neglected and making it right again. There's something." He paused. "Honest about it." She turned slightly on her stool to look at him. "You use that word a lot. Honest." He looked back at her. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said. "It's just uncommon." 3 Fridays later, they had moved back to table 7. It had happened naturally. Without discussion, Jack had arrived first, as always, and when Clara came in at 6:40, she had simply walked to his table and sat in the side chair she had pulled over that first evening. Marla had started bringing a third cup automatically. It was by any measure a small and quiet thing. 2 people eating dinner on a Friday evening, talking sometimes, not talking sometimes, watching the street through the east window when the conversation ran dry, which it rarely did, and which never felt like failure when it did. Clara had not told anyone at work about it. This was not, she told herself, because there was anything to hide. There wasn't. She was having dinner with someone. People had dinner with other people. The concealment, if it could even be called that, was more a preservation instinct. Her professional life operated under a particular kind of scrutiny. Every lunch, every association, every friendship that existed outside the walls of the company had a way of becoming useful information for someone. She had learned to keep her private life in a separate container with a secure lid. But there was another reason, one she was less comfortable examining. She had at some point in the last 3 weeks started to look forward to Friday evenings. Not in the abstract way she looked forward to the weekend, or the way she looked forward to a productive afternoon. She looked forward to it the way you looked forward to a particular stretch of road you only drove once a week. The one with the good view. The one where you turned the radio down. Her father had died 2 years ago. A stroke, sudden and complete, on a Tuesday morning in March. She had been in Singapore for a conference and had gotten on the first available flight home and had arrived 14 hours after he was gone. She had handled it, she believed, correctly. She had been present for her mother. She had managed the estate and the memorial and the transition of the company with efficiency and care. She had taken 1 week of personal leave and returned to work and made the transition look as smooth as anyone could have managed. What she had not done, she was beginning to understand, was grieve. She had managed her father's death with the same competency she brought to a product recall or a personnel crisis. She had treated it as a situation requiring decisive action rather than a loss requiring time. Jack hadn't said any of this to her. He hadn't pushed or probed. He had simply been, Friday after Friday, someone who was fully present with his own loss. Not consumed by it, not performing it, just carrying it openly the way you might carry something heavy without pretending it wasn't heavy. And something about sitting across from that, or beside it, technically, from the side chair, had started to loosen something in her that she had not known was tight. She mentioned her father finally on the fourth Friday. Not the whole story. Just, my father built the company. He died 2 years ago. I never really. She stopped. Jack had not filled in the blank for her. He had not said I understand or I'm sorry or grief takes time. He had looked at her steadily and said, do you come here for the pie? She had looked at him, startled, then not startled. No, she said. He had nodded once, as if that settled something. She had driven home that night thinking about the question. Not what he'd meant by it, she understood what he'd meant. But the precision of it. The fact that he had cut straight to the thing she'd been circling without pointing at it directly. He had a way of doing that. Not confrontational, not therapeutic, just clear. The way you reached up to pull a covered lamp cord and the room simply had light again. She had told no one about her father in this way. Her therapist during the year after his death had been thorough and competent and had helped her develop functional coping strategies, which she had implemented and which had worked in the sense that she had not fallen apart. What she had not told her therapist, what she had barely told herself, was that she was angry. Not at her father for dying. At herself. For being in Singapore when it happened. For being 3 calls deep in a conference schedule when the nurse had rung. For arriving 14 hours too late and walking into a hospital room where everything had already been decided and the machines had already been silenced and the shape of her father under the sheet was a fact she had not been present for the making of. She had treated the anger as a project management problem. Identified the irrational elements, addressed the actionable ones, filed the rest under unresolved. The anger, it turned out, had not read the memo. It was still there. Clara knew this now, sitting in the diner light on a Friday evening, in a way she had not quite known before. Jack asked her if she came for the pie. Because she hadn't. She had come, she understood now, because she needed a place where carrying something wasn't treated as a deficiency. The first problem came on a Wednesday. Clara's communications director, a sharp and efficient woman named Simone Gray, had forwarded her a photo with a brief message, for your information. Someone posted this. Do you want me to address it? The photo was of Harlow's diner, taken from outside through the east window. It showed 2 people at a table, a man eating, a woman in a dark blazer sitting beside him with a coffee cup, both looking toward the window. It wasn't a dramatic image. It wasn't even particularly clear. But it had a caption. Spotted, Harrow CEO Clara Vance having a weekly dinner with a mystery man at Caldwell Street Diner. New chapter. The image had been taken, apparently, a week ago. It had circulated in a local business gossip channel, the kind of ambient noise that Clara usually ignored entirely. She stared at the forwarded message for longer than it deserved. Then she typed back, no. Don't address it. Simone replied, understood. Just flagging. Clara put her phone face down on the desk. The rational response was exactly what she had done, nothing. The photo showed 2 people having coffee in a diner. It was not a scandal. It was not even interesting in the context of her actual professional life, the quarterly reviews, the regulatory compliance audit she was navigating, the possible acquisition she had been in quiet talks about for 6 weeks. It was the most minor possible noise. But it introduced something. She found herself that week thinking about the dinner from the outside rather than the inside. Asking herself how it looked, whether Jack knew about the company she ran, whether he had looked her up, whether any of this, the weekly dinners, the gradual accumulation of shared Fridays, was something she was building, or something she was merely allowing to happen to her. She had always been uncomfortable with that distinction. Building implied intention. Allowing implied passivity. She did not, as a general rule, allow things. She decided them. But she was finding it difficult to draw a clear line around what was happening on Friday evenings. It didn't fit the categories she used for her professional relationships, colleagues, stakeholders, strategic partners. It didn't fit the categories she used for her personal life, which were, she was beginning to realize, quite thin. She had close friends from college who now lived in other cities and with whom she communicated reliably and warmly and insufficiently. She had a neighbor who occasionally took in her mail. She had a gym she attended 4 mornings a week and never spoke to anyone at. She had, it occurred to her, organized her life in the same way she had organized her grief, efficiently, at a remove, in a manner that left very little room for anything unplanned or unscheduled or arrived at sideways through a flat tire on a cold street. On Thursday evening, she was standing in her kitchen at 9 p.m. eating leftover pasta from a container and looking at her phone, and she thought, I could just not go tomorrow. It would be the easiest thing. She could schedule a Friday dinner with a board member. She could send Simone a note about a strategic dinner with the CFO of the company they were in quiet acquisition talks with. She could fill the evening with something productive and purposeful and measurable. These were the categories in which she had always felt most confident. She stood in her kitchen for a while eating pasta, not making the decision either way. Then she thought about the side chair. About the 3rd coffee cup Marla brought without being asked. About Jack saying, some rituals are how you stay honest with yourself. He hadn't said it to her. He'd said it, she thought, to himself, half out loud, on the 2nd Friday, when she'd asked if he ever thought about stopping. He'd said it quietly to the window, as though he was reminding himself. She put the container down. She went to bed early. And Friday morning, she did not schedule anything for the evening. The 3rd week of November. Jack wasn't there. Clara arrived at 6:45, a little later than usual, delayed by a call that had run over, and table 7 was empty. Both chairs facing the room. The folded cardboard shim still under the leg. The salt shaker in the center where it always was. No second place setting. Marla saw her looking and came over. He called this afternoon, she said quietly. Said he wouldn't make it tonight. Family thing. Is he okay? He didn't say otherwise. Marla paused. You want your usual spot? Clara sat at the counter. She ordered the beef stew, Jack's order, though she didn't realize this until halfway through, and the apple pie, and ate alone, facing the mirror behind the counter. She looked at herself in the distorted chrome surface, slightly warped, slightly golden in the diner light. She thought about the fact that she didn't have his number. They had been having dinner together for 5 Fridays, and she didn't have his number. She didn't know his address. She knew he had a daughter named Lucy and that he ran a renovation company and that he drove a dark green truck that he parked on the side street. She knew that his wife had liked roasted chicken and iced water with lemon, and that the last Friday they'd had dinner together here, he had made a promise. She knew the shape of his grief more precisely than she knew his last name. She left Harlow's at 8 and drove, without entirely deciding to the address she had found earlier that week. Not intrusively. Just the company, Brennan and Sons, was registered, and the address was a matter of public record. A house on Sycamore Lane, in a neighborhood of older homes with good bones and mixed-condition yards, the kind of street that her renovation clients usually lived on. She sat in her car in front of the house for a moment. The lights were on. The porch had a small bench and a pair of child's rubber boots on the step. A jack-o'-lantern still sat by the door, a month past its season, slightly sunken, beginning to cave. She was about to leave. This is strange. You barely know him. Go home. When the front door opened, Jack stepped onto the porch. He saw her car. He was still for a moment. Then he stepped down to the walk. She got out. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I don't know why I came. He looked at her without alarm. Is everything all right? Yes. You weren't there, and I didn't have your number. She stopped, looked at the sunken pumpkin by the door. I don't know. I just came. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Lucy's sick. Low fever. I stayed home. He paused. Do you want to come in? The kitchen was warm and slightly disordered in the way of houses where one person was doing the work of two. A drawing was taped to the refrigerator, a horse, green, for reasons that were exclusively Lucy's. A library book about rivers was open on the kitchen table. The specific orange crackers were in a plastic bowl on the counter. Lucy was on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a fleece blanket, watching a nature documentary with the sound low. She looked up when Clara came in. She was small for 6, with her father's gray-blue eyes and brown hair that was coming out of its braid in the way of a braid that had been slept in. She looked at Clara with the frank, unhurried assessment that children applied to strangers. "This is my friend Clara," Jack said. "She was worried because I wasn't at dinner." Lucy looked at Clara. "Are you the lady from the restaurant?" Clara glanced at Jack. He had a slight, careful expression. "Did your dad tell you about me?" "He said he talks to someone there now." Lucy was quiet for a moment, watching the documentary. A walrus had appeared on the screen. He didn't used to talk to anyone there. Clara sat down in the armchair across from the couch, the one that faced the television. "Are you feeling better?" "Sort of." Lucy looked at her sideways. "My throat hurts when I swallow. But not when I don't." "That's very precise. My dad says you have to be specific." Jack appeared from the kitchen with a glass of water and a small bowl of crackers for Lucy. He handed them over with the practiced efficiency of a parent whose child had very particular requirements and sat on the couch beside her. Lucy adjusted the blanket to incorporate him without taking her eyes off the walrus. Clara watched them. There was something in the way they existed together. The easy physical proximity, the small adjustments, the way Lucy occasionally looked up at her father, not for reassurance but simply to confirm he was still there, that was both ordinary and enormous. It was the texture of daily life. The kind that was invisible from the outside until you were inside it. She thought of her own apartment. The clean surfaces, the organized kitchen, the calendar on her phone that told her where she was supposed to be and when. She thought of the efficiency with which she had organized her life after her father died, how she had, within a year, redesigned her personal space so that nothing in it would require her to miss anyone. "Miss Clara?" Lucy said. "Yes. Do you come to the restaurant because you miss someone too?" The room was very quiet. Jack looked at his daughter, then at Clara. Clara sat for a moment with the question, its pure, unguarded accuracy. "I think," she said slowly, "I came because I met someone who reminded me that it was okay to." Lucy considered this. The walrus on the television dove into dark water. "My mom used to say that missing someone is like." Lucy looked at the bowl of crackers, choosing her words with great care. "It's like having a room in your house where the light doesn't work. But you still go in there. You just go in there in the dark." The room was very still. Jack's hand was resting on his daughter's knee, and he wasn't looking at Clara, and his jaw was very quiet. And Clara thought, he carries this every day. He carries it and he shows up and he makes her breakfast and reads her library books and buys the specific orange crackers, and he does all of it while the light doesn't work in that room. "That's a beautiful way to say it," Clara said. Lucy looked at her. "My dad taught me that." He looked up then, and Clara held his gaze for a moment. Just a moment. And something passed between them that was not romantic in the conventional sense, not yet, but was something possibly more durable. Recognition. The understanding that both of them had been walking around their respective houses, occasionally finding themselves in the dark rooms, and had finally found someone else who understood what that meant. He came back the following Friday. Clara was already at table 7 when he arrived. She had, for the first time, arrived before him, at 6:10, settling into the side chair, ordering her coffee before he walked through the door at 6:14. Marla had raised her eyebrows very slightly and said nothing. He stopped when he saw her, not with surprise, he had known she would be there, but with something she was learning to read in him, the small, considered pause before he let himself feel something. He sat down. Marla brought the beef stew, the roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables, a glass of water with lemon, and 2 coffees. The second place setting was there, as always, untouched as always, the napkin folded, the utensils aligned. But tonight there was something new. Beside the side chair where Clara sat, there was a third place setting. Not ordered. Marla had simply added it. A small, deliberate gesture of inclusion that required no discussion. Jack looked at it, then at Clara, then at the second setting across from him. "I told Lucy about this place," he said. "What did she say?" "She said she wants to see where the light is." Clara looked at him. "She meant," he started. "I know what she meant," Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the street was lit amber, and the first real snow of the season was beginning, fine, thin, the kind that landed on coat sleeves before you noticed it. Inside, the diner held its warmth, its particular Friday evening sound of silverware and low conversation. "I've been thinking," Jack said. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "About what Nora would think of this." He glanced at the second setting. "She would have." He stopped. A small movement at the corner of his mouth. "She would have liked you." She liked people who said what they meant. Clara looked at the roasted chicken. The glass of water with the lemon wedge still floating. "I've been thinking about my father," she said. "It was the most